have an emergency?
Yeah, this is Jim at Pinellas County 911. We've gotten a report of a ship collision out under the Skyway Bridge.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're just getting reports now. They have a report of a fire on one of the boats, one of the ships. And my supervisor wanted to call to find out if you guys would be able to respond if needed.
Fire department, do you have an emergency?
Yes, I do. We have a ship collision in Tampa Bay.
Okay, where's this at?
Mullet Key Channel, number 21 and 22. It's right off of Mullet Key.
21 and 22.
Yeah.
Is this the Coast Guard?
Yes, it is.
Okay, are you on the scene?
No, we're not yet. We've got 3 boats en route. The quickest ETA so far is about 45 minutes. I understand it's a gasoline barge that was involved in the collision, and it's completely wrapped in flames.
On August 10th, 1993, about 6 a.m., 3 different ships, 2 barges and a freighter, collided in a Tampa Bay shipping channel. The impact caused 3 separate emergencies. The freighter, Balsa 57, had a large gash in its side and was taking on water rapidly. One of the barges, the Bouchard, also had a gaping hole and would eventually lose over 336,000 gallons of crude oil into the waters of Tampa Bay. But the most spectacular sight was the raging fire on the grounded barge known as Ocean 255. The barge was carrying about 7.9 million gallons of jet fuel at the time of the impact, and one of its several compartments had caught fire and exploded upon impact, throwing back the thick steel deck like a piece of plastic. Still attached to the burning barge was the sea tug Seafarer, whose crew had abandoned ship shortly after the collision and fire. St. Petersburg emergency officials and the Coast Guard were first notified of the accident and implemented emergency plans. These plans included requesting mutual aid assistance in suppressing the raging fire from the City of Tampa Fire Department. The presentation you're about to watch will try to explain why the Tampa Fire Department was involved in an operation so seemingly far from the city. Also, we will be explaining some of the pre-planning that has gone into preparing for a ship fire in the Tampa Bay, including the purchase of specialized equipment necessary to handle such a problem. But more importantly, we will be taking you right up beside the raging inferno, showing you some exclusive video that was recorded by the fire department videographer as Tampa firefighters boarded the burning vessel in an attempt to extinguish some of the fire. You will also hear from several of the career firefighters who planned and performed this difficult and time-consuming battle. And finally, we will visit with some of the people cleaning up the beaches in the aftermath of the huge oil spill. The Tampa Fire Department serves the emergency needs of the city with about 500 uniformed personnel on 3 different shifts located in 22 different fire stations throughout the city. In addition to the typical urban setting, Tampa also has a large airport and seaport. The Tampa Fire Department is charged with meeting the unique needs of the Port of Tampa.
The Tampa Fire Department has the responsibility of the port fire protection within the port boundaries of the Port of Tampa. And the foam and some of the equipment that we use, such as our fireboats, was purchased by a fee which is placed on the tonnage that goes through the port each year. So we have those supplies and equipment that was purchased by money from that fund.
The Port of Tampa is the 7th busiest port in the nation. Hundreds of ships with a variety of cargo visit the docks each year. Ships are not the only concern for those charged with protecting the port. There are several large storage areas that have been the site of previous emergency responses. One of the fire department responsibilities is to plan for the emergency before it occurs. In preparing for a possible emergency at the port, the Tampa Fire Department operates 2 fire boats.
This piece of apparatus behind me is Fireboat 2. It's an amphibious piece of equipment, and it has a fire pump which can displace 1,250 GPMs per minute. This was instrumental in our recent barge fire that we had in the port.
The other boat is a smaller but faster craft that is capable of delivering firefighting crew and water supply rapidly to most areas of the port. Other equipment purchased by port fees include a foam tender truck, referred to as Foam 4. This truck carries 69 55-gallon drums of foam. This foam is a necessity when trying to extinguish flammable liquid fires. With the firefighting foam and the special equipment necessary to apply the foam, this truck can be promptly delivered to large fires in the port or anywhere in the Tampa Bay area.
Obviously, the Gulf Coast had some fire monitors that were probably the most capable at the fire scene to do the job. Yet we couldn't have put out the fire without the LCMs that carried the truck of foam alongside us.
This equipment would be useless without properly trained personnel readily available to place it in service.
Well, the Marine Division consists of stations 17 and 18 people across 3 shifts. We have 2 fireboats and a subfin engine, an engine that can function as a piece of aerial equipment. And one of our primary duties is protecting the port with our firefighting apparatus and our fireboats.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the first group of hazmat technicians that were trained for the special operations team, and at that time they decided that they wanted us to get some training in auto extrication, rope rescue, and also specifically marine firefighting. So the group that I went through special operations training with was sent to New Orleans to go through a marine firefighting school that they offered out there. So I feel like we had some pretty good training as far as how to handle a shipboard fire like this.
Also, it is important for Bay Area fire departments to conduct what are called mutual aid drills.
Right. The Saturday before the Tuesday, we had just had the opportunity to train with Tampa Fire Department, Captain Ballinger, and he went over his entire boat and with the crew and showed us different things. In fact, took us out in a boat and told us, it was kind of coincidence, about boat fires and ship fires, what to do if one would occur. And one of it was like grounding the boat there to shallower water, which they had done. So a lot of stuff he had told us that day came to play Tuesday. And then we went over our boat with him too. So he was a little bit familiar out there working with us, know our capabilities.
On the morning of August 10th, all of these resources would be pressed into service. Firefighters on duty that morning responded to the alarm on several different craft.
It's quite a run out there. It's probably going to be a 45-minute to an hour response time, also depending on the seas.
I received a call at home at approximately 6:15 hours that morning, telling me that we had a ship collision just south of the Sunshine Skyway, and that one of the ships was on fire. Asked for a helicopter to meet me at fire station number 1 at our helipad. I responded to the scene, arriving at a little after 7 a.m. Did a flyover of the barge. Did observe that we had a large amount of fire coming from what appeared to be a hole in the deck of the barge that had been blown open during the initial explosion.
Well, because it is amphibious, but that does not mean that it's designed to go long distances on land. So we loaded on a flatbed and took it over to DeSoto Park.
While those personnel on duty that morning responded to the scene, others traveled to work, hearing the news reports.
Well, as I was coming into work on the morning of the 10th on the Crosstown Expressway, I heard a radio report about the fact that we had a couple of ships involved in an accident, and one of them was on fire, and that the Tampa Fire Department was responding to assist in the handling of this situation. That was my first information on the fact that we had this incident going, and it made me think maybe today might be a good day not to come into work. But I went ahead and came on in and spent the next 24 hours basically working on this incident.
On the way to work, heard it on the radio in my truck that there was a barge fire out in the channel. Pretty well figured it was going to be a very long day, especially that when we are the Special Operations Unit is part of the Marine firefighting unit for the city of Tampa. Not downplaying St. Petersburg, but not knowing that they probably didn't have the resources, and with our foam capabilities, that we would definitely be over there before the morning was over.
Some of the first fire department crews to arrive were those on Fireboat 1 and also chief officers from both the Tampa and St. Petersburg fire departments.
As we began to get into the situation, we began to perceive our role as twofold. One was to protect the very valuable tug that was still hooked up to the burning barge, and secondarily to minimize the metal fatigue on the barge so that we could keep the product inside the barge.
As I approached the scene from the interstate, I could see the column of smoke coming up, and I can remember walking up to District 5's car to relieve Chief Spirik, and just looking at the fire, the magnitude of the fire, the height of the flames, and the amount of the involvement was something that I've never seen before in my career, and it was very, very impressive and a very formidable opponent to try to combat.
After assuring the crews of all three involved ships were safe, fire officials began to set up an incident command post. From this location, all firefighting efforts would be coordinated.
Command post area that we were using was immediately roped off and secured by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, as well as park security, because we were using a park as part of our command post and staging area. Together with Chief Matt Balabam of the Tampa Fire Department, we worked together to start gathering up resources and setting up a command structure for this incident that was very apparently going to be a long duration type of a problem.
The fire departments were not the only ones mobilizing for this large firefighting effort that was imminent. Also, private companies were at work preparing to lend their help.
Where they came up with the idea of taking the fire monitors off of the old fireboat and bringing them here. That in itself was proved to be quite an operation, as in a period of about 3 hours we had perhaps 15 maintenance people on board welding and cutting and putting the equipment together, and at the same time several firefighting people stocking our boat with hoses and various paraphernalia that could be used to put out the blaze.
The monitors were installed within 3 hours from the time that we were notified. All the other piping, fire pump, all was already installed in this vessel. All we lacked were the monitors. The monitors were brought to us from the Tampa Fire Department. They were from the old Tampa Fire boat, and they worked out real well. As you can see, they helped us to contain the fire and also to put the fire out.
As the day wore on, plans that had been on paper for years were put into effect. One of the most time-consuming parts of this plan was arranging for Tampa's foam firefighting capabilities to be transported out to the burning barge.
In that effort, we contacted the 231st Transport Company of the U.S. Army Reserves and arranged for the landing craft which are utilized to transport our firefighting equipment and personnel. These are the military-type landing craft that you used to see in the old John Wayne movies where the Marines would land on beach. And our intentions were to drive our foam vessels and firefighting equipment directly onto the landing craft, and then those landing craft would go out to the barge and be used for the firefighting effort.
I also went ahead upon Chief Chalmers' instructions and met with the incoming Tampa fire units, Tampa Foam 4 and Engine 9, on the interstate as they were coming into St. Petersburg, and directed them to the location of embarkation, which we put them on the LCMs.
If you would, give us an idea now. How many years experience do you have with the department?
9 years.
You have 9 years experience. Here you are loading this fire apparatus onto these landing craft. What was anything going through your mind? What must that have looked like?
It was quite an unusual sight, especially when you consider how carefully you take care of all these pieces of equipment, and to basically have to manhandle them onto an LCM. And it's not a ginger operation at all, because we're working with angles that aren't normal. We're working in tide planes where the boats are coming up, and having to work with all this tonnage and heft of equipment to try to get it on board. The driver engineers of the Tampa apparatus were just exceptional in getting their apparatus driven on board, basically on the vessels. We had to equip ramps and such to get them up on the boats. And LCMs do not travel the fastest thing in the world. It was kind of like having an elephant caravan proceeding over to the fire scene.
By late morning, both Tampa fireboats were on the scene, as was the tug Gulf Coast.
Early in the day, we just kept the steel cooled down and kept all the steel around the fire as cool as we could with the monitors.
And when we got on scene, the Coast Guard asked us if we would try to cool some of the deck of the barge, keep the metal cool, and also prevent some of the fires that were starting on the tugboat, because that was the most valuable piece of equipment out there. I think the owner said it was worth $18 million, and he wanted to salvage as much of that as possible, naturally.
One of the fire department's main jobs is to protect property from any further damage. The fire and explosion had pretty much destroyed the fuel barge, but the attached tug, the Seafarer, was still salvageable and needed protection. The Seafarer was ordered by the Coast Guard to be left attached to the burning barge for two reasons: so that there was some control over the barge should the tides move it, and secondly, to give firefighting crews a safe point of boarding for future fire suppression efforts.
So we stretched a hand line on board the tug and went inside to check out that basically storage locker, and did indeed discover that just about everything in that forward compartment had burned up. Luckily the hatches had been closed and the fire was pretty much contained. When we opened up the door to go into the compartment, we did have a little bit of fire break out in one corner, but that was quickly extinguished, and really that was the extent of the actual fire damage to the interior of the tug. The initial explosion, I believe, spread jet fuel all over the top of the barge and the front of this tugboat, and that fire, as well as the flame impingement from the tank burning, which was pushing back against the tugboat, did do quite a bit of damage, but all that fire had been extinguished long before we got out there. So the tug was in pretty good shape, and I'm sure will be completely salvageable.
By the latter part of the afternoon, most of the equipment was nearly on the scene for the planned foam attack, but Mother Nature was about to intercede.
That's correct. We just cleared the skyway by just probably 100 yards when we got caught in the storm and had to tie off there until the storm blew over. Well, it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be, really. It was pretty windy and it rained real hard, but there was so much weight on the landing craft that it really didn't rock it or shake it around much.
Once the storm hit us, which it got there pretty quick after what seemed to be quick with the time frame, it was quite a storm. I was piloting boat 2. I had to run due east and keep the boat directly into the waves, and I think I had about 8 people on the deck of the thing. Boat 2 is very, very low to the water. I had a large concern of washing someone off the deck of boat 2, and I had one of the Coast Guard cutters come alongside and take some of the people off the deck.
Fortunately, the Gulf Coast, being one of the heavier vessels at the fire scene, was able to maintain itself at the fire with foam or water, depending on the situation, throughout the entire storm. The other vessels involved were in a position where they had to either fall back or literally head for the beach temporarily until the waves had died down a little bit.
After the storm had passed, Tampa Division Chief James Bates, who was in charge of the fire department operations, called together a meeting of all the firefighters who were to take part in the fire attack, and clearly explained his strategy and desires.
Our problem is we have on hand enough foam to maintain a foam blanket for about 60 minutes. We anticipate it's going to take us 15 to 20 minutes of steady application to bring the fire under control. But we need to maintain that foam blanket for as long as possible. Right now we've got 60 minutes of possibility of maintaining that foam blanket. That's the reason we got to cool as much of the steel as possible before the foam application, so that it does not deteriorate that blanket of foam. Once that blanket of foam is on there, it's imperative that nobody puts any water on that foam blanket. at the time that we designate, we're going to shut down cooling of the steel and start our foam operations. I don't want any tugboats, any Coast Guard vessels, any private Sarasota, Tampa, whatever, squirting any water onto that vessel. We're going to, after we get it knocked down and under control of the foam, we'll get on there with hand lines and try to maintain the foam blanket and the integrity of cooling down either vessel steel if we have to, and keep the water out of the foam blanket.
With all of the planning done and the firefighting forces nearly in place, only one major decision was left to be made.
That there were a large number of logistical things that needed to be set up. Equipment had to be loaded on military boats, foam had to be brought into place, game plans had to be figured out. There was just a lot of things that needed to be done before we could even consider ourselves ready to actually go out and extinguish this fire. At the point where we had all of our things together, there was still some delays because there was some discussion over whether or not it was advisable to actually put this fire out or if it might be preferable to let it burn. Although it might seem obvious to most people that there's a fire, let's go and put it out, there's a lot of other concerns. There was concerns that extinguishing the fire might lead to more environmental damage, either from the foam that got into the water, or if we had accidentally overflowed the fuel off of the ship and put more of the fuel into the water, if somehow our actions had caused the ship to break up in some way or suffer some sort of a catastrophic failure. Naturally, that was something that they were concerned about. So there was just a lot of discussion, talking back and forth, trying to weigh the pros and cons before the decision was actually made to go ahead and extinguish it. And not actually being involved in those conversations, I don't know everything that went on, but I'm sure they were all, legitimate concerns. From my end, I was just eager to get out there and get the job done because I felt that we could do it. So once they gave us the go-ahead, everybody was kind of relieved to actually go out there and get to work and get the job done.
The seas were rough as the firefighting force got into place. Just forward of the fire area was the tug Gulf Coast that had been pumping water all day to try and cool some of the barge's metal. Positioned next to the Gulf Coast was an Army landing craft with 27 55-gallon drums of foam. The Tampa firefighters helped the tug crew prepare for the foam attack. On the same side of the burning barge, just behind the fire, there were two landing craft positioned, one with engine 9, which is a squirt truck that has an elevating nozzle. The other landing craft had Foam 4 and its supply of firefighting foam. Fireboat 1 was needed to supply water to engine 9 and its elevating nozzle.
Finally, the word came back at approximately 9:30 p.m. to go ahead with extinguishment. At that time, we started applying foam, and we had calculated that we would need approximately 3,000 gallon per minute flow in order to extinguish this fire.
Some minor mechanical problems and rough seas hindered the foam attack. Also, the side of the flaming barge had split, spilling burning fuel into the water near the firefighters.
Sit there once. Yeah, Chief, be advised, we're starting to get a little bit of runoff here into the water and starting to get a little bit of surface fire on this water from a crack in the side of this hull.
QSL, what kind of foam solution are we generating?
Chief, we're going to have to replace this line that we've got here that was leaking. That shouldn't take us but a minute.
QSL, operations to Chief 11.
You want to keep flowing foam?
Operations to Chief 11.
Chief 11 by.
What quality foam are you applying? Does it look like good, heavy foam?
We're achieving knockdown from our end.
Pardon me?
We are achieving knockdown from our end.
QSL, you're getting good penetration with the foam to the seat of the fire?
Sure, we can see inside the hole now.
QSL, quit moving it around, just keep it in that one place and keep applying it. Moving it around does nothing. Cut off that other water that's flowing.
The heat from the raging fire caused some unanticipated problems, but the firefighters quickly overcame these.
When engine 9 that was mounted on one of the mic boats got their boom in place and was ready to flow foam, the fire was so hot that it melted the hose line at the end of the nozzle, and that had to be replaced. Once that was replaced, we had to dedicate another nozzle from this boat to direct the stream onto that rubber hose so it would keep it from melting until the nozzle got in place to start flowing foam.
Chief, I'm looking directly into the hull and I can see the foam blanket laying on top of the product.
QSL. Operations engine 9. Engine 9, Barge. How long before we get foam flowing again?
I estimate 3 minutes and it'll be flowing.
QSL.
Chief, if that can't get engine 9 operations, we can flow a second flow here. And foam 4 can be brought over to this location.
We're going to try to get 9 back into operations, and I think if we can get both lines flowing simultaneously, we can achieve extinguishment. QSL?
Approximately 10 or 15 minutes into the operation, one of our pumps that was supplying foam had some mechanical problems and had to shut down. That put us at a little over 2,000 GPM flow, which we continued to flow foam at this time, knowing that we were marginal, but we felt we could still extinguish the fire. 40 minutes into the foam operation, we did have complete knockdown. But about 25 minutes into the fire, we still had a lot of fire left, so we were getting a little bit apprehensive about whether or not we could continue, but we felt that if we continued to flow long enough with the volume that we had going in there, it would attain complete extinguishment of any open flames.
After we started flowing the foam, we achieved knockdown and suppression in number 6 starboard hold approximately 15 to 20 minutes after we had first initially started flowing foam. After that time, we were able to direct our foam streams to the number 6 port hold, into the cracks, and also into the deck plates that had buckled from the contracting of the metal in the number 6. We were able to get foam in that area and get knocked down, and also there was a large crack in the number 7 hole. We were able to get our foam stream into that area and get knocked down. We used seawater and foam. We were moving about 1,000 GPMs per minute, and it made very good foam. We were very surprised at the quality of foam we were able to get.
Engine 9. I don't want a direct penetration of the foam solution into the fuel. I want it lobbed into it. Can you achieve that?
QSL.
Operations to Mike Boat 1. Operations to Mike Boat 1, Chief Cap Simmons.
Mike Boat 1.
Are we attempting to put a hand line into operation from your location?
QSL, Chief, I'm physically on the deck of the barge now.
QSL, how long before we can expect the hand line application?
I'd say about 10 more minutes, Chief.
QSL.
So once we actually started, everything went fairly well. We applied approximately 1,000 gallons per minute from each of 2 master streams to extinguish the main body of the fire, which was essentially an open pit fire because the lid had been blown off the tank that was most heavily involved. Beyond that, I would say we had that pit fire basically knocked down within 15 or 20 minutes pretty well, maybe a half an hour at the outside, and at that point we had to extend some hand lines on board the actual tanker to extinguish fires in adjacent tanks that we couldn't get those master streams into. It was pretty interesting climbing up on board that ship knowing that there had been a fire of such intensity burning there just shortly before. As we did our operations up there, the fire would flare back a little bit as it, as our foam blanket broke up a little bit, and as we applied more and more foam, we began to see headway and see more and more of these fires in the adjacent tanks go out. But it did take hours of handline operations and reapplications with the master streams to actually bring the fire completely under control.
And during the night, we continued to resupply the foam blanket about every 15 to 20 minutes to maintain a good solid foam blanket. We did have about 3 or 4 flashbacks during the night in one compartment, which was hard to get to with the large volumes of foam at one time. So we used what we call a wand to apply some soupy foam down into that compartment throughout the night to keep a good foam blanket in there. We had the last flashback about 05:30 hours the next morning. From then on, it was just a matter of staying on scene, keeping our foam blanket integrity in good shape, and then at 3 o'clock that afternoon, we turned the operations back over to the salvage company, who continued the salvage and overall operation from then on.
While firefighters prepared their attack, Coast Guard members were busy trying to control crude oil that was leaking from another damaged barge. The tides and weather worked in the Coast Guard's favor for a few days after the accident, but a change in wind direction brought over 300,000 gallons of oil onto the beaches.
When we got on site approximately noon on Tuesday, we commenced to deploy boom towards Egmont Key. We were responsible for booming that west side and east side of the island. We deployed approximately 20,000 feet of containment boom around the island. The first 3 to 4 days into the spill, the weather was definitely in our favor. We went through a change, and now the wind has changed, and it's forcing the product up on the beach now. Cleanup work continues, as you can see, and will continue for several weeks to come.
As in any major alarm, fire department members will review their actions in hopes of improving on activities at future alarms.
Communication could have worked a little bit better between the military agencies and the fire agencies. Having another service personnel may have helped a little bit, but overall, after not having done an operation like this before, the utmost happened. We got the fire out the quickest way, and nobody was hurt. It was a successful operation.
One thing that I think we learned from this is that our command structure needs to acquire a dependable marine radio. We found ourselves in a liaison role, transferring messages from the Coast Guard vessels to our TFD command, and from the TFD command to the Coast Guard vessels. At some point during the situation, the fire department was able to acquire what I understand was a portable marine radio, and that took us off the hook for a while until the battery failed on it, and then we had to go back to our liaison function.
We had to make arrangements to get equipment and manpower all the way from here over to DeSoto Park. We had to deal with problems of getting the equipment onto the military boats, then decide how we were going to arrange the various equipment so that we could get the foam that we needed to where we needed it. We had to deal with a storm that blew up out there in the middle of operations and forced some regrouping from that standpoint. So it really was amazing to me that the operation, despite these various difficulties, continued to flow real well and, proceed step by step to a favorable conclusion.
Quite frankly, very impressed with the cooperation of both the crew on board the Gulf Coast and also the fire department. It seemed that everything seemed to get done as it was needed. Very few orders had to be shouted. If cans of foam had to be moved, it seems there were always enough hands to move it. If a fire monitor was being manned by someone who was getting tired, there was a fireman or a Gulf Coast personnel person to take their place. I was extremely impressed with the cooperation of all the people concerned, and also perhaps received a new perspective on the fire department. I quite frankly was extremely impressed, especially as they went on the burning blaze with hoses in hand, in spite of the fact that there were multiple explosions that from time to time literally rocked the barge, and yet these men would go back again and again to try to distinguish the flames. It was quite a lesson in teamwork.
I felt that the operation went very well, and we owe that to all the other agencies that were involved in the operation, such as St. Petersburg Fire Department and the Coast Guard the environmental regulations people, as well as the Army Reserve, and numerous other agencies I probably couldn't even begin to name, such as the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, MSO office in Tampa. Without all the support and help of all those agencies, this may have not have been a successful operation as it turned out to be.